Hello guys, welcome back and thanks for joining me again as we get started on our next lesson to conceptual overview of VPC. This is where we'll start to introduce the terminologies used in the AWS world as far as networks are concerned. In today's world, we do not build networks physically in the cloud. When we start to build any resource in the cloud, we make virtual resources. It's like a virtual machine, a virtual database hosted on a virtual instance, and then the network is also virtual. In Amazon Cloud, this virtual network is called as a VPC. VPC is an acronym that stands for Virtual Private Cloud. All the concepts that you learned in the previous lessons will now be applied to help us build a virtual private cloud or a VPC in AWS. So in AWS, virtual private cloud is your network. Subnet remains a subnet. So there is no special name for a subnet in AWS. It's going to remain the same. And then inside the subnet, you start hosting your resources. For example, it could be a database or an EC2 instance that would reside inside the VPC inside your subnet. You will have full control over who has access to the resource that you place inside your VPC. You can define what should be the IP address ranges of your network, of your subnets. You create the subnets. You configure how the data should go in and out of the network gateways. Now, you should be aware that when you create an AWS account, a default VPC is created for you. So we're going to take a look at the default VPC in the upcoming lesson. But for now, this lesson is just to make you familiar with the terminologies used in the Amazon world. So the VPC is your network and subnet is a shorthand for a subnetwork, which is also a subsection of your network, which generally includes all the devices or computers or databases in that specific location. So you can compare it to our school analogy, okay, where you got all of those devices sitting in the same class and they can talk to each other. And all of these devices have their own set of IP addresses. Now, these IP addresses are derived from the CIDR block that is assigned to the subnet. So since you are creating the subnet, you are creating the virtual network, you decide what should be the CIDR block of the subnet, what the CIDR block of the VPC must be is something that you decide. And based on that, the IP addresses of those devices are automatically assigned. So in this case, if you take a look at the CIDR block that we chose, which is 192.168.0.0/16, and for the subnet we got 192.168.30.0/24. So that just means that all the devices in this subnet will have the same network ID. Well, yes, the first part of the CIDR block is called as the network ID, and the last octet or the last part will then be called as the host ID. Okay, so this part here will remain the same for all the devices in the network, but the last octet will be unique, will be constantly changing for every device. So inside your AWS cloud, you can have several VPCs together, and those VPCs can then talk to each other as well. Remember the scenario in the school where we said there's a CERT global network and there's a reigning cloud network, and they would like to talk to each other. Well, that's the same scenario which I'm referring to here now. If you got multiple VPCs in AWS, you can have some kind of a routing mechanism done so that these devices in different networks talk to each other. So just to summarize, you can have multiple VPCs in AWS. You get a default VPC in every region by default. The resources like the EC2 instance and the databases will be hosted inside the subnet. The IP address of those devices will be governed by the CIDR block that you have assigned to the subnet. Alright, so that's for the summary part. In the next lesson, let's go ahead and dive into the Amazon console and see how the VPCs look like and where you can create subnets using the user interface. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.